Hi, I'm Anna Curtis. I'm the Dyslexia Specialist here with Hattiesburg Public School District. Today, our presentation on our tips and tidbits will be dyslexia. Let's review the basics. To begin, as always, we will go over our mission and vision. Hattiesburg's mission is to educate all students to become productive citizens of a dynamic global community. Our vision, the Hattiesburg Public School District, is a model teaching and learning community that graduates productive and caring citizens who are prepared to succeed. Here at Hattiesburg Public School District, we have 4 goals. Those goals include academic success. Let's let our slides catch up. Here we are. Academic success, community support and engagement, safe and orderly schools, and fiscal accountability. Now, today, we will be going over the definition of dyslexia, the components of dyslexia, characteristics and signs you may see in a student who may have dyslexia, and what to do if your student has a ruling or has those indicators of dyslexia. So, first off, what is dyslexia? A basic definition can be described as dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin. Now, to go a little further into that, the International Dyslexia Association has given a much deeper definition. Dyslexia is characterized by difficulties with accurate and/or fluent word recognition and poor spelling with decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language. Secondary consequences may include problems with reading comprehension, poor vocabulary, a reduced amount of background knowledge. You've noticed that I have underlined the main components or important parts of this definition. But the most important thing is to understand that it is a specific learning disability and it's neurobiological in origin, which means that typically it can be genetic or someone may be born with it. It's not always acquired. So the American Speech Language Association has mentioned that there is often a correlation between children who have spoken language problems also having reading problems. One of the indicators that we will talk about later on is students who are delayed or have problems with speech and language may also have dyslexia. So here, as we mentioned before, dyslexia is neurobiological in origin, which means it has to deal with the brain. Our brain is divided into 2 hemispheres, the left side and the right side. And each hemisphere has a purpose. The left side is our problem-solving side. It's very analytical. It's where we derive all our logical decisions. It's where we do math and all our problem solving. Now, the right side is our creative side. It's where we have that artistical or musical recognition. It's where our emotions come from. It's our abstract side. Now, if you look here, each hemisphere has different lobes or different parts. We have the front, the middle, and the back lobe, and each lobe has a specific function. So the frontal lobe near Brokaw's area is where we develop speech and language. This is where we learn to talk and articulate and where we form meaning. Now, the middle or the parietal temporal lobes is where we get our decoding skills from. This would be where we learn to break words apart into sounds or how we learn to sound out things. And then the occipital temporal lobe, more further in the back, is where we have that reading skill. This is where that automatic word recognition, it gets stored into your brain for automatic recognition when you're reading. You don't have to think about how to read. It is just something that becomes more natural to you. Now, look at this image of a brain from a dyslexic reader versus a typical reader. Now, you will notice with the typical reader, all three areas of that hemisphere is activated. However, for our dyslexic readers, they are more prone to only activate that frontal area. This is why it is so difficult for students to learn. Instead of using all areas of their brain, they are really only focusing on one area. This is another image just to kind of compare the two between a normal learner and a dyslexic learner. You can see that they are activating the incorrect areas versus the areas that they should be. So when children with dyslexia or anyone with dyslexia is learning, they have to have these pathways in their brain retrained to take the correct pathways to reading, spelling, word recognition, and all those other components. So that's just a little basic biology lesson on dyslexia. It can go much further into detail, but I just tried to give a quick little overview so you can understand that this is an issue with the brain and how it works. Next, we're going to go on and talk about the origin of dyslexia very briefly. A lot of people think dyslexia is a new concept. However, dyslexia has been discovered for well over 100 years. You can see here on the timeline that in the 1800s, it was first termed as word blindness. And then as years went by, dyslexia became more noticed, more recognized, until now we have laws that are even pointed towards helping students with dyslexia and finding ways for research and how to accurately overcome dyslexia. Now, occurrences of dyslexia. Dyslexia is fairly common. About 15 to 20% of our population has a dyslexia diagnosis or a dyslexia ruling. It is prominent in family members, which means it can run in families. It's common in left-handed individuals. There are studies that some say are more dyslexia people are left-handed than right-handed, but there are also studies that go against that as well. Individuals with dyslexia often have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. The statistic is around 80% of people who have a specific learning disorder, such as dyslexia, may also have ADHD. Dyslexia occurs in both males and females. So next we're going to look at this. It is a spectrum disorder, which means it can range in severity. Some students have just mild dyslexia. It means at times they may experience some letter reversals. Decoding may be a little bit of an issue, comprehension, but typically they can learn strategies and they can overcome it with little trouble in school. Then it can go into moderate. Now, this is when students or people are more slow and labored in reading. They have trouble decoding. They have difficulty following along in class, and they're not as excited about reading. Their grades may struggle. Then, of course, you have severe. This is when reading is very slow and labored. It's very hard. They may suffer in class. They may present a behavior problem. They have difficulty in reading, spelling, comprehension at all levels. They can't follow multi-step directions. They have poor memory. They're slow to progress even after interventions or remediation. Their language and their speech may even be an issue. They may have trouble finding the right words to say. So no one person with dyslexia is the same. The components of dyslexia, eventually I will be doing some tips and tidbits on each of these components, but today we're just going to do a quick little overview. The first and most important component is the phonological awareness component. Now, this is a broad term that describes the awareness of sound patterns in oral language. This is the understanding that sounds and syllables make up words. It's the first step of reading, really. Sometimes it's called an umbrella term, hence this graphic of an umbrella. It includes syllables, words and sentences, rhyming and alliteration. And then it also has to deal with phonemic awareness, which is the ability to hear sounds and words and be able to manipulate those sounds. That may be through addition, deletion, or substitution. Segmenting words, this means breaking them down into sounds or syllables, being able to blend them together, and being able to recognize them in isolation. Alphabetical principle. This is similar to what it sounds like. It's being able to identify the letters in the alphabet and the names of those letters, the letter sound relationships, how to recognize and form those letters. It could also include the directionality when writing or the ability to alphabetize. Memory is another component of dyslexia. This is the ability or inability to remember a sequence of unfamiliar sounds, storing sound sequences within words in short-term memory, and effectively recalling words from short-term memory. So this is the ability to hear or read something and then be able to recall it. Memory reading and spelling long words. So remembering the rules of spelling or memorizing those difficult, hard to spell words. This may be an issue for someone with dyslexia. Strong phonological memory skills are predictive of successful decoding skills, reading accuracy, and larger vocabularies. Rapid automatic naming. We mentioned this earlier. This is the ability to access phonological information stored in long-term memory with precision, efficiency, and ease when given a series of things to name as quickly as possible. So this goes back to our science lesson on the brain regions. Typical learners store information after multiple times of exposure that no longer requires decoding. This allows us to recognize words on sight. Sometimes we hear them called sight words. However, as we grow and expose ourselves to more words, we have a much bigger word bank in our brain. And when those words are stored into our long-term memory, we're able just to look at a page and read those words without having to think about it. However, people with dyslexia don't just struggle with automatic naming of words. It could be numbers, colors, pictures. You have to remember their brain is on override, making it more difficult to name things in a rapid pattern. Oral language, as we mentioned from the Speech and Language Association, language is a big component of dyslexia. So oral language includes learning to talk, pronounce words, acquiring a larger vocabulary over time, using appropriate grammar based on age development, following directions. Someone who struggles with oral language or has dyslexia may confuse before, after, left, right, those concepts. Learning the alphabet, hearing nursery rhymes and songs, understanding concepts and relationships, and retrieving words or naming problems. So all of this falls under the topic of oral language, which can be a component of dyslexia. Here we have a quote that says, "Oral language is the heart of written language." And that's when we go into reading. So as we know, reading is a major component of dyslexia, not just knowing how to read, but also the phonological and phonemic awareness, the auditory discrimination, that's being able to hear the different sounds and words and say them appropriately. Learning the sounds associated with letters and remembering the names and shapes forming letters. Often when someone with dyslexia reads aloud, they will omit short words or small words in reading, such as the and of. That's another very common trait of dyslexia. Written language, the comprehension and expression of thoughts through the use of characters, letters, or words that are formed on material, such as paper. So as we know, putting that word recognition, that problem with being able to pull out words very rapidly, well, this has to do also, this falls into written language as well. When they're trying to put their thoughts on paper, it's not as easy for them to develop those thoughts and to form them in an appropriate manner when writing on paper. So what are some characteristics of dyslexia besides the ones that we just went over? As we mentioned, the biggest key to dyslexia is difficulties in phonological processing and phonemic awareness. This is a big red flag for when screening or evaluating for dyslexia. If especially an older student has difficulty with phonemic awareness, it may be a hint that dyslexia is at hand. Poor memory, poor rapid automatic naming, poor alphabetic principle, accurate and fluent word recognition, poor decoding, and poor encoding. So as you've seen, 6 of these are in bold letters. These are the 6 components that our kindergartners and our first graders are screened on when being screened for dyslexia. We go into what we also explain: written expression, short attention span, poor handwriting and penmanship, poor oral language development. They may suffer in mathematics. Sally Shaywitz is an expert in the field of dyslexia, and she has stated a dyslexic child has a weakness in reading, but that weakness is surrounded by a sea of strengths. So here we have relating to your students with dyslexia. This is a short passage or paragraph that a student or someone with dyslexia, when they look at something that looks normal to us, this might be what they're saying. So when they're trying, or what they're seeing. So when they're trying to decode it, it does not come out accurately. So take a second and try to decode this yourself. What do you think this says? So if we go on here, we will see that this paragraph is the word dyslexia derives from the Greek word dys, meaning poor, and lexis, meaning language, literally meaning poor language. This is another example of what someone who experiences dyslexia may be seeing when they look at a book or a reading passage. I have had students tell me that letters are floating around on the page, or when they read, the letters are moving. So as I said before, no one person with dyslexia is the same. They may all see differently, or they may see it correctly, but their brain is transferring it as something differently. So it can be very hard and very confusing. What are some common signs of dyslexia? As you can see, there are a lot of them. If a student only experiences a couple of them, it does not necessarily mean they have dyslexia, but that also goes vice versa. If they are experiencing a lot of these, or you're checking these off and you think my student does this, you may want to look into having your child screened for dyslexia. So for pre-kindergartners to second grade, some of the common signs are trouble learning alphabet, letters, sounds, numbers, days of the week. Now, this can be difficult, but the thing is after a long period of time of learning this and they're still not grasping that idea. Difficulty remembering names of people and or objects. Again, not being able to pull out that word recognition or say like, oh, I know it, but not be able to say it. Using age-appropriate vocabulary, staying on topic, shows no interest in listening to stories and books. Speech and or oral language delays. They have difficulty rhyming with rhyming words or nursery rhymes. Understanding directions, they hear it, they can repeat it, but they don't understand what those directions mean. Constantly repeating after you. Distinguishing numbers from letters, they're not able, or maybe they are able to do it at one point, but then they keep calling numbers letters and letters numbers. Accurately segmenting and blending, recognizing sight words, spatial concepts, performing consistently day to day, handwriting skills, poor spelling, and loses interest or has a difficult time focusing for appropriate amounts of times. Now, common signs for some 3rd to 8th graders. Trouble following multi-step directions. Difficulty staying on task, may have trouble finding the right word to say. That tip of the tongue moment happens very often. Difficulty acquiring a strong vocabulary, rhyming, understanding figurative language. They can't, even after being taught or hearing it, they still don't understand. Avoids reading, especially out loud. They tend to procrastinate more often than none. They omit small words in reading. They substitute words in reading. For example, they'll read house for home, or they'll say, street instead of road. Their word attack skills are poor. They're not able just to read a word automatically, even though they've seen this word many, many times. Spelling rules, they're unable to remember those. They have inconsistent spelling. This means sometimes they know it, sometimes they don't. They have poor handwriting. They have difficulty putting words or thoughts onto paper without written expression. They tend to be unorganized, and they tend to have poor comprehension when reading aloud. But when you ask them verbally, they can easily tell you exactly what happened in a story, or be able to retell a reading passage if it was read aloud to them, or if they were reading silently to themselves. So now we're going to go on to high school to college. Some of the common signs would be persistent reading and spelling. They've had difficulty with this from a young age, and it hasn't gotten much better as they've grown older. Reading takes great effort and slow pace. It's almost exhausting for them after they read something. They tend to avoid anything that has to do with reading or spelling or writing. They have poor note-taking skills. They often mispronounce names of places or people or things. They have difficulty remembering things. They have frequent tip-of-the-tongue moments or word retrieval. They are fatigued from reading. They're disorganized or have poor time management skills. They have to devote much more time to studying or learning than typical learners. They need ample guidance or directions. They have inconsistent spelling, and they have difficulty navigating or following directions. Some of the things is, even for our younger students, they may have mastered it at one point, and then the next day it's like they've never seen it before, and it's like a brand new thing. Even though they've been taught and they showed that they could do it, the next day they can't. Inconsistency is a very common sign. Sometimes when they see something on the board and you ask them to copy it, they copy it incorrectly, even though it's right there in front of them. Those are other signs that you may see. So what do you do if your student displays some of or a lot of these signs? The first step would maybe to contact me, your dyslexia specialist, and we can talk about strategies and techniques and interventions that may help your student if they are struggling in the classroom. We can look at dyslexia screening. A dyslexia screener. We will also have a presentation on that to really go into depth about what that entails. But a dyslexia screener just gives characteristics of dyslexia. It does not give a ruling, an official ruling of dyslexia. An official ruling has to come from a licensed psychologist, psychometrist, or speech language pathologist, and it has to be a formal evaluation. That means it will go through the special education department, and it follows a legal procedures and processes to take place. So if your student does have dyslexia or has a ruling of dyslexia, they should be receiving dyslexia therapy, which is a multisensory, intensive, systematic approach to learning. So if you need to contact me or you have any questions, I know this was a lot of information. This was just a very shortened, fast-forwarded mention of dyslexia. We could really go into further depths on this, but for today, that's just what we're going to go over for our tips and tidbits. So here is my information. I am Anna Curtis, the Dyslexia Specialist. This is my email address and my office phone number. Please do not hesitate to contact me with any of your needs. Thank you, and I look forward to next time.